So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Luis, and I believe we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Well, first of all, I believe that the efforts that are being done to pursue an investigation and research regarding the topic of what should be measured and what is being measured is really important. So I really want to encourage everyone in this group and your colleagues as well, if you guys can help us out, work on those links that right now Jennifer showed, that would be amazing. We will send this presentation to all of the persons that registered in this webinar, so don't worry if you didn't catch it, it'll still be there. But first of all, I'm gonna make a small pause to congratulate a Mexican hero in HTM that's here with us. Roberto Ayala, happy birthday from everyone here. And well, very good. We're gonna be discussing the second part, that is, well, first we are going to produce metrics and indicators and KPIs and KRIs and performance reports, etc. So one thing is to produce those results. And the second one is, how do you communicate those results to the directors, to people that actually are, let's say, more involved in the business strategy of a hospital or in the legislation part. So, and I have a really important question to everyone, and it's really a question to think about, is how many times have you felt that you've worked so hard, but you haven't been, receiving the proper, not congratulations, but the proper understanding of the value of the work that you're doing. So we as HTM practitioners, as clinical engineers and as service engineers and technicians, you know what it's like to be in a hospital and to be there 24/7 working on everything. And it may seem that as time advances and work's keeps getting more challenging, you just keep doing the same thing and you don't grow. So one of the main hypotheses behind this that Jennifer and this project are trying to prove is basically through the measurement, we get an understanding of how we're accomplishing all of those goals. So we're going to talk about how to communicate effectively with stakeholders and how to engage with them, because stakeholders are people that have an impact, either positive or negative, regarding everything that we do as clinical engineering. And this is a term being used in project management, which is later defined, that I will talk about right now in a bit. So talking about project management, there is an institute in the United States that is called Project Management Institute, and the PMI describes, well, actually they're the ones that are pursuing this discipline of project management in an international basis. And basically what a project manager does is to create or modify an existing product or service that serves a purpose. Okay, so we could say that unofficially everyone here is project manager, because you guys have built processes, you guys have built a clinical engineering department, etc. And all of those things are projects, because they're focused on producing a result. And the difference between a project and an operation is that a project has a definite start and ending, while an operation can be being done over and over again, and it's cyclical. You know the steps to do it. So that's why an operation is considered an activity that on an ongoing basis is being produced without let's say an end date. While a project, if you want to build a house or a hospital, you know when you're going to start and you have a deadline for you to finish. And the Project Management Institute has a book which is really important for us project managers, that is called Project Management Body of Knowledge, or the PMBOK, PMBOK. And this describes a methodology on how to build a nice project. So if you guys can log into the website of the PMI, that would be nice. And I know that CED is working on a body of knowledge, which actually focuses on producing results expected from the clinical engineering department. So this methodology relies on 10 knowledge areas, which are the ones that you see on my screen, which is scope management, time management, cost management, procurement management, stakeholder management, communications management, human resource management, quality management, risk management, and integration management. So my understanding of these 10 knowledge areas is that for any company, these are the main 10 areas that produce the biggest quantity of pains in a company. Either it is budget, or it is procurements, or it is stakeholders, etc. So it's really important for us to to know that these knowledge areas, although they are knowledge areas, they're also the topics that we have to assess when building a project. And stakeholder management is a really, really important one, because stakeholders have to do with our project and get impacted positively or negatively by the result of the project. So if, let's say we're building a clinical engineering department, we're from ground zero, we're going to start over and we're going to find processes, etc. We have to think, who is a stakeholder in this project? Who is involved in the end result of this project? Well, practically and very much everyone in the hospital. So the board of directors or the C-suite is really involved, because the clinical engineers work with the second most important asset in a hospital, which is medical equipment, after the people, of course, and the professionals are working on it. So medical equipment has to do with everyone in an institution. It has to do with the patient, of course. It has to do with who uses the device. It has to do with whoever can get, involved in an adverse event, either chemical risks or biological risks, etc. So we have to think of them in advance. But what this session, or this part of the session, is really about is, how do I even know what they're expecting from a clinical engineer? And another question is, how do I even know they know what is a clinical engineer? So regarding stakeholder management, some activities on the clinical engineering department are projects. You know, you have projects all the time. Either you're gonna receive, let's say, a bunch of medical equipment, or you're gonna do some HTA processes for this, etc. And you also have operations, and it's really important that everything gets measured either with metrics and indicators. The difference between a metric and an indicator is that a metric is everything that can get measured, and an indicator is justly something that tells you how close or far you are from accomplishing an objective. So the difference between metrics and indicator is practically the focus that you give it to the measurement. So if, let's say, you want to, you're assessing a budget, let's say in a clinical engineering department. So a metric would be maybe the number of transactions that you've created or you've accomplished with that budget. But an indicator would be the budget completion. Let's say, how much money have I spent to this day? And the difference between those two measurements is that the metric of number of transactions maybe doesn't tell me much about, a specific goal that I want to reach, but the indicator of the budget completion or the amount of money that I'm spending right now actually tells me how much money have I spent from my objective of spending this determinate quantity of money. So and in indicators, we have a lot of different variables. For example, KPIs, which are key performance indicators, or key risk indicators as well. Number of adverse events, number of mean time failure between event, etc. is another one. So at the end, the metrics and the indicators have to help us visualize the current state of what we're doing regarding projects and, of course, operations. And this is really important because it maybe symbolizes like a gauge that we have to have first for us to evaluate ourselves, and second, to show to the board of directors how good or bad we're doing in work, because as well, this is really important to communicate everything. So let's say the most general command chain is that we have the government and the shareholders of a hospital that have a relationship with the CEO of the company, because as CEO, this person is the leader of the rest of the areas and has a team with certain knowledges and skill sets that work either on operations, on finance, etc. So the CEO knows what the shareholders want, but also he knows, maybe he has a department regarding regulation and everything, of course, but he's responsible that the hospital is okay with everything specified on the law. Okay, so the CEO has someone on operations, okay? And this person on operations oversees everything regarding infrastructure, regarding the services, the areas, the equipment that needs to be handled there, etc. And this operations works with another areas, which are maybe the medical staffing. So, I mean, not the medical staffing per se, but with a medical service manager, with a finance manager, etc. So normally, and I say this normally because this most of the time happens, but not every time, the operations manager speaks to the head of the clinical engineering department or the head clinical engineer. Maybe there's another, let's say, immediate command chain of the head clinical engineer, but somebody has to report to someone, right? So in this case, and in this example, the operations manager is in charge of, assessing the work done by the head clinical engineer. And this head clinical engineer oversees the work of specialists, engineers, technicians, which are the ones that relate most to the medical equipment. And of course, it ends up at the patient. So this, I put this commas in the command chain, has to do with stakeholders. Each and every word you see here is a stakeholder, because everyone has to do directly or indirectly with the medical equipment being available and safe. So if we are talking about command chain, we're showing who gets taken care of by who, or who gets evaluated by who. But look at the communication process. So we have the patients that get related to the medical equipment in an indirect manner, of course, because they get either diagnosed or treated or rehabilitated with medical equipment. But the medical equipment are the ones who talk in a hypothetical way with the technicians, right? And technicians have to talk to the specialists and engineers. And the specialists and engineers have to talk to the head clinical engineer. And here's what the biggest problem is. If you're working in a clinical engineering department or in a biomedical engineering department, and the only reason that they call you is when something is wrong, or the only binary measurement that you have is when nobody tells the CEO or the operations manager that something is wrong, means that you're doing okay. Here's the biggest problem you have, and we've seen this in a lot of hospitals. We've talked to managers, operations, medical, finance, etc., and we've asked them one question. So how do you measure the performance of clinical engineering? And most of them, at least in Mexico, say, well, we measure costs, of course. We know how many we spend on medical equipment post sales or operations. And we measure let's say if they're doing a good job, it means that nobody's coming here to talk about it. Or if they're doing something bad, we assume that somebody, is just speaking their mind out on how the medical equipment are not working. Or if the medical equipment are not functioning, or we have a lot of downtime, etc. But there's not a lot of of a criteria of measurement, and it's really important that we help the clinical engineers and the technicians and the specialists keep growing by measurement, and also it's really important that we have a communication process that goes from bottoms up. Okay, so the work that gets done by the operation needs to translate not in a technical language, and that's what I told you in the beginning. We need to speak the language of the manager, or we need to have a translator that helps us translate the operation from this translate the operation to a decision-making process. Okay, so it's really important that we focus on this problem, and that you actually talk with each and every one of these people and just ask them, like, what do you expect from the clinical engineering department? Is there any data that you would want to receive from us on a recurring manner, or every 2 months or every 3 months? Like, what are these metrics that you expect to see? Do you want to see costs, but not in a whole? Like, you want to see costs regarding, let's say, spending on accessories, or spending on let's say parts, etc. So you want to see it by brand, you want to see it by provider, etc. So this is where the magic starts happening, because the manager starts seeing the value of someone having let's say a management skill set of everything that needs to be done for the metrics to come up. So this communication process is really interesting, and we have to just talk about this myth that no news is good news. Okay, so we've talked to many managers before on the past, and just asked them, like, how is your clinical engineering department working? Like, are you satisfied? And there's this way of saying it in Spanish, which I'm not gonna do because it's it's really funny, but in English it's basically, well, nobody has come here to talk crap about the clinical engineering department, so I assume everything's fine. So no news is good news. But there's much more than just like knowing that if somebody talks bad about the clinical engineering department is this is going bad. Like, we need results, we need measurements, and as Jennifer said, like staffing, like mean time between failures, like there's where the research and the richest information is on the metrics, because Lord Kelvin said what doesn't get measured won't ever improve because it degrades every time. And this is so true even with our own budget. Let's say we earn money on a monthly basis, and if we don't measure on what we're spending, we're never going to improve, because we're never going to detect those faucets that need to be closed or adjusted in order for us to represent a better result. So at least my hypothesis, and this would be a really interesting discussion with the group after the presentation is over. So why is the reason that the clinical engineering department is always on the basement, that there's no money to buy simulators and analyzers of medical equipment? And basically it's one of either two. At least this is my personal opinion. One, either the managers or directors don't know how to measure the performance of the clinical engineering department, and for instance, they don't know how much value is included in that department. So that's one. And two is basically because they don't care. There's this book that was written by some of the CED members regarding clinical engineering. I can't remember the name now, but it's edited by Ernesto Yadanza. It's called Clinical Engineering, I guess. It's a white book. I'll send you the link on Amazon. And there's a really nice article that says, the number of clinical engineers in a hospital is directly proportionate on the interest of the institution or healthcare system on these topics. And they mention regulation, patient safety, budget optimization, etc. So 4 or 5 criteria. And it's really important to see how it is true. Like if they don't care about, saving money and saving lives, or they care but not as much through technology, of course, they're never going to hire more clinical engineers. And that's, that's a fact. Like if they don't know how to measure it, they won't understand it. So we end up in the same phrase, said by Lord Kelvin and then by Peter Drucker and some other authors regarding management skill set. So first of all, it's really important what Jennifer said when she showed this draft is every company is different. And, a hospital is a company, and it is a company. It doesn't matter if it's private or public. It is a company because it has to administrate a certain amount of money in order for it to survive. So it is a company. Maybe it doesn't sell anything, talking about governments, but it has to, analyze and assess everything that comes from income and outcome. So it is a company. And this company has to be, a feasible business for it to be, working the years to come. So it's really important for us to assume and understand that every company is different and does things differently. But at the end, maybe the goal will be the same, which is bringing patient safety, helping people get better, and being a feasible and really reliable business. So talking about stakeholders in this company that's called a hospital or a clinic. According to a PMI, these stakeholders are people that get impacted either positive or negatively by the results of the project. They have interests in the project, and they also work with the project manager, which is the leader or the person responsible or attainable of producing this result. And the stakeholders can be the project manager, the project sponsor, providers, project team, customer, and other involved departments, etc., which translate, of course, to these people right here that we were talking about earlier. The government is a stakeholder because, if our project or our operations do not meet the criteria established by the government, we have a huge problem. And the results of this project or operation may not be, as good as we thought they were going to be. The shareholders are stakeholders as well, because it's their money, which is there. And of course, they want to be producing a certain amount of money or objectives each and every term, right? So the CEO is a stakeholder because he's a leader of leaders. The financial medical operations manager are also, because medical equipment is related to finance, to the medical director, to the operations as well. So they are also stakeholders. The head of a clinical engineer maybe is a project management, the specialists, the engineers, etc. And of course the patients, because the well-being of medical equipment and medical devices ends up in a patient. So they are the most important stakeholders, not because they're involved in a project, but because of the end result can be a catastrophe for them. So this is the main definition of a stakeholder. And now we're going to talk about how to engage them. But first of all, we need to learn that if we are not talking to these people, to these professionals, and understanding what their needs are and understanding what are they expecting from the clinical engineering department, we're not going to get anywhere. And this is one of the main reasons CED is doing a great effort to talking to stakeholders and also the wider public, because we want to know if they know what a clinical engineering is, a clinical engineer is, I'm sorry. And also we want to know as well as how to make them understand that our value comes from assuring that the medical equipment works the way it's supposed to be, that the service companies are, prepared to do X, Y, etc. So that everything works towards the same goal, which is making devices available to assess patients in a safe and reliable manner. So not talking to them is a huge problem. So if I could leave anything here on the table with you guys, is talk with your stakeholders and ask them questions, basic questions like, what do you know about clinical engineering? How would you measure the efforts of the clinical engineer? One time I did this this exercise where I went to 10 pharmacies in Mexico, which have responsible medical doctor that does just first attention diagnosis. And of course, when you get to the place and you get diagnosed, you get measured your vital signs. So I asked a question to 10 people, and when they were measuring my blood pressure, it's like, hey doctor, like I want to ask you like one simple question. And of course they didn't know I was a biomedical engineer. And I asked them, when was the last time you, like, this is the medical equipment, right? Yeah. So when was the last time you serviced this, this piece of equipment or calibrated, or like, does this thing need calibration at all? And they were just like, no, well, I bought this like 5 years ago and I've never done anything because, it doesn't need calibration. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's when I took my hat of clinical engineer and I told them, like, all right, so this is a piece of measurement. It gets worn with time and with, conditions and metrology uncertainty, and et cetera. So maybe you've diagnosed somebody of hypertension when, the hypertense was the equipment, not the patient. So not talking to them and letting them know what we do and why it matters is a huge problem. And I'm going to leave you with 4 process groups that are related. This is taken directly from the project management body of knowledge on stakeholder management, and I adopted it to clinical engineering. So first of all, we need to identify who these stakeholders are. Second, we need to plan how we're going to manage these stakeholders. And third, we need to manage their engagement in what we're doing. And number 4, we need to control these engagements, okay? So these are the 4 main areas that we're going to focus, and we're going to talk about the first one on identifying stakeholders. So how do I identify them? So first of all, we need to get a small piece of paper or open a spreadsheet or open Word and just make a list of all the stakeholders that we think might be involved in the clinical engineering process. So we know that we do inventory management, that we do maintenance management, et cetera. So we need to do a list of these stakeholders, all right? So we're gonna create this directory and we're gonna include some important information such as where to contact them, what is their position, if they are, accessible people or they're, more serious people, like we don't know, maybe their character's a little bit tough, but also maybe just include their birthday to maybe break a little bit the ice on their birthday, and just like, maybe a postcard or maybe a cupcake or maybe, a small detail will make the difference on opening doors for you in the project. Because you have to know that in any project, you need to be an excellent negotiator. You need to convince people to give you resources, to give you time, to give you interest, let's say, in the project or what you're doing. So these small details do matter. And third, go to each of them and, tell them what you're doing. Tell them that you're doing this directory of stakeholders because you want to keep everyone on the loop on what the clinical engineering department is doing. And ask them if they think that there's somebody else that should be included and why. Like maybe the operations manager will tell you, oh, have you talked to this person? And then maybe you haven't. And that's, maybe a key person that you didn't know was involved in the process. that is a result of one of your processes. So this is really important. So just talk to them and ask them if there's anyone else you should be talking to. Number two, so we've identified all the stakeholders in our projects and operations. So number two is the really important stuff where you have to break the ice. So you need to plan a meeting with each stakeholder, a 10-minute, 15-minute meeting, where you explain to them what a clinical engineer does. Okay, so maybe you can have some material prepared, maybe a piece of paper, or maybe something that you printed out on what is clinical engineering. I know that the CED website includes a great variety of material on what clinical engineering, how clinical engineering helps every healthcare institution. So maybe just prepare some material for them to read on their own time. And, just take a moment to explain to them, all right, so these are the main processes that we're involved in. So inventory, maintenance, training, HTA, etc. And just let them know how your activities relate to theirs, all right? So regarding the profile, maybe you're talking to a patient, or maybe you're talking to the general manager. So just let them know that how, maybe you don't even know how they relate. So just ask them, like, how would you relate what I'm doing to your work? And then it's really important for you to ask them, why like if any of these clinical engineering processes, if something goes wrong, which process would concern them the most, okay, and why? So maybe the medical service manager says, like, all right, so if any piece of equipment is not working, like, that concerns me because I will want to know. So, okay, I need to keep him in the loop. Maybe not every time there's a failure, but let's say every time there's a high cost equipment that fails, because that would maybe mean that what we're doing, like if the equipment is failing, maybe there's a whole area that is not working. So that impacts both on diagnosis or treatment and on income. So it's really important to understand which of these processes concerns them and why. So then just asking them an open question, like, what are your expectations of the clinical engineering department? Like, what is your wish list or your Santa Claus list, or the things that we have to meet in order for you to be, talking good things about us, okay? So then ask them also, as well, like, is there any measurements that we need to have delivered to you, and on what frequency? Maybe they want to report every 3 months or every 6 months regarding performance, or regarding, service tickets. Every time a person calls the clinical engineering department, like, I want to know how many times they call you a month, and I want to know, like, what percentage of those times that they called you ended up being a real failure. Because there's a big sport in hospitals of people, doctors and nurses, calling the clinical engineering department and letting them know that there's urgent matter to be assessed. And then when you get to the ER after 15-minute jog from hospital to, like, from place to place, and then changing to go into the OR, etc. Like, you just see the cable not being plugged into the wall, or you see, medical equipment not being turned on. So that is timing at the end. And that's timing that, if you had the time of the world, like, of course, it's no problem, because you're there to, assist in a technical manner. But what's really important is what you're doing with the time. I have this saying that the most important resource in this world is money. It's not money, it's time. So time is the most important resource, because what you do with that time gets an impact on each and every one of those expectations and goals that you have. So what you do with your time is gold. It's even more gold than your money. So it's really important that you take your time on a daily basis seriously. And by analysis and measurement, let's say 1 out of 10 times that they call me, like, there's really a problem with that. So if I measure that and I host a small training session, just focus on that problem, maybe I can, reduce the number of times that they call me. But that's not possible if I don't measure that again. So, build a stakeholder profile with this information, and just, like, do a small draft of, who this person is, what they like, how would they like to be informed, etc. And it's really important for you to manage these stakeholders through those results and through those metrics. So keep them involved, send them a report, send them a small email, like, do a minimum viable product of this, and just start testing out how everything, just keeps working. Number 3 is, how do we manage their engagement? Okay, so first of all, you have to stand by your word. So if you say you're going to send a report the 30th or the 31st, you need to send it that day. And if you can send it before, even better. So by being responsible and being a professional and delivering good and productive results. Also, we had one time a mentor said that the only thing that he expected from us is to inform him when there are bad news. So not to, just put a little sugar on the coffee before to speaking of bad news, just like say them the way that they need to be said and in the time they need to be said. So don't hide anything. And that's how you're going to keep stakeholders engaged, just being clear, being informative, being professional. And also, just regarding communication, just remember that profile that you wrote on the previous step is really important to understand how you're going to win this stakeholder over. Okay. And number 4 is how do you control stakeholder engagement? Okay. So just meet them on a regular basis, ask them for feedback. And if they're not really involved, you need to find a way to persuade these stakeholders. And also you need to know that it's really difficult as well to assess stakeholders regarding their personalities, thoughts, etc. So the conclusion on this nice session is that there's a binary way of measuring results, which is a practical sport right now among hospital managers, and we need to change that. So if we measure things and communicate them in a way that they will understand, I think, and as well as Jennifer was telling a moment ago, like they will understand the value of what we're doing. So CE performance evaluation is not taught in management schools, and it's not taught in clinical engineering, at least in Latin America. And this is something we need to start learning now, not only project management, but also stakeholder management. Like how do we measure results and how do we deliver them? Also measure only what matters to a project and to stakeholders. Avoid those vanity metrics, which are metrics that sound really nice, but just don't help in anything. And last but not least, communicating metrics is as important as producing them. So don't focus on building a nice report with cool presentation and everything, but also focus on what communication brings you. And well, folks, we invite you to get in touch with us. This is the first session of the webinar series. We will be having a minimum of 1 per month. Next month, we're going to be talking about metrology. Almer from Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a CED collaborator, is going to join us to talk about the aspects of metrology. And please, if you have any doubts, any suggestions of topics, please let us know through each of these channels. We will send you this presentation, and the recording will be available as well. And don't forget to keep in touch, and also to invite your colleagues over to these webinars. On our behalf, this is everything. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar as well as we enjoyed preparing it and talking to you about it. And Jennifer, I don't know if you have any closing comments regarding what we're doing here before closing the session.
Thank you, Luis. Thanks so much for all of that information on stakeholder management. I think really helpful, and I took a lot home from that as well. Again, I just wanted to echo the thanks for your participation in this, and I hope we see all of you on our upcoming webinars. I didn't know we're right up against our hour if we wanted to take some questions, Luis, or if you would rather have people kind of write them in and maybe we can publish those out.
I think that would be better because we have 2 or 3 minutes left. So if
okay, perfect.
If you guys could maybe write them down and send them to us in the email that we're going to send you, that would be really nice. And maybe we could do another session with questions and answers regarding this topic.
Perfect. And I think that'll be great to publish on the IFMBE site as well.
Sure. Great. Tom, any closing comments?
Wonderful job, both of you. Thanks so much. And as you heard, February metrology, and then March through December this year, we're going to take off the 10 competencies one at a time and really talk about a little bit describing these 10 competencies that many of you seen, and let us know if you haven't, we'll get them to you. And talking briefly, describing them, but really getting into field-based examples of how they work out in real life in your world, and talk about the leadership aspects of those competencies, unique competencies in clinical engineering. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. Don't forget to keep in touch, and we'll send you the recording and materials whenever they're ready, today or tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you.